How can the foundation make a speculative investment without running afoul of this excise tax imposition? The first thing is the purpose for which the speculative investment is made has to be charitable. And the language is the same language that is under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. So these are the same criteria of purpose for what will become, as we will see, a social purpose business, but nevertheless pursuing a social aim. So that social purpose business may be religious, may be scientific, literary, or educational, fostering amateur sports competition, which is the Olympics, preventing cruelty to children or animals. And then finally, it may not, as charity also may not, seek to, why don't we move on here? I'll come back to that. Seek to influence legislation or participate in political campaigns or support candidates for office. And again, the reason for that is we're not going to be using tax-subsidized money to create a competitive advantage for one candidate or party over another. But the point I want to make beyond that is, even though the investment itself is deemed to be speculative and would otherwise be subject to an excise tax, and even though they're not in it for the money, they're in it for the social good, income or property appreciation not being a significant purpose behind the decision of the foundation, nevertheless, we will see that income production or property appreciation can in fact occur, and it is our expectation will frequently occur. So it is not disqualifying to have a profitable investment. It's only one that where the primary motivation behind the investment is something of a social nature rather than a financial nature. But understand the alternative to the foundation would have been to give the money away outright. So having a speculative investment with some chance of recovery financially and an important social aim pursued is a better calculus than giving the money away with the expectation of some social gain. Now, there are lots of different kinds of program-related investments. Below market loans may be made by foundations to what we will now see as a social purpose business. And indeed, there is no obligation that any interest at all be charged on the loan. So interest-free loans are perfectly permissible, as are loan participations, even loan guarantees, deposits, community development banks, equity investments, whether as a shareholder, a limited liability company member, or even favorable leases that may be made available for social purpose businesses at premises owned by the foundation. What kinds of examples are we thinking about when we talk about program-related investments? And here are just a few of them, and this is purely illustrative. Low-interest loans to needy students, equity investments in low-income housing projects, low-interest loans to disadvantaged business owners, direct investments in businesses which create jobs, investments in land conservation or brownfields mitigation. The list goes on. These are merely suggestive, all of which would be reasonable and appropriate program-related investments for which can be funded in lieu of annual grants or partly in lieu of annual grants at the discretion of the foundation. Now, program-related investments have some problems. They're tough to design, they're tough to implement, and they're tough to monitor. And indeed, as you'll see, the law actually today discourages social innovation. That's a tragedy, and L3Cs are a very important step toward curing that deficiency in the law. Now, why is it so tough to go with a PRI? Historically, they've been perceived to be too complex to put together and too expensive to implement. There's no process that guarantees that a program-related investment will satisfy statutory requirements and regulatory requirements, which is a growing body of the law. So the foundation always has a risk in saying, okay, we're going to make an investment in this venture, hoping and praying that the IRS isn't going to come back to us and say it wasn't a program-related investment at all, and therefore we've under-distributed this year. Similarly, there's no statutory mechanism to ensure that the destination of those funds, that is the entity created to receive them, will satisfy statutory and regulatory tests. So what happens is two choices today. Before a foundation moves ahead with a program-related investment, it either goes for a private letter ruling from the Internal Revenue Service, which is a very expensive and time-consuming proposition, and often a difficult one to predict, or it relies upon an opinion of legal counsel, which itself can be expensive. Therefore, most foundations say it's just not worth the effort, it's not worth the expense, we'll just divvy out our grants and be done with it. There is also an inherent conflict of interest in having a foundation become a partner, and I use that in the broadest, least technical sense, with a social purpose business, because they have competing statutory obligations as fiduciaries. For-profits are obliged to maximize shareholder value. That's what the statute said. That's what all the case law says. And yet, PRI recipients must not produce income or property appreciation as a significant purpose. So how can you do both? Well, you'll see the L3C does. It bridges those differences in objective which are statutorily imposed. Now, what is an L3C? An L3C is a low-profit, limited liability company. First, we define, well, what is a limited liability company? A limited liability company is a form of doing business, and this is a business enterprise. It is not a nonprofit. And it's a business enterprise that is not corporate in form, but nevertheless shields its owners from the debts of the venture. So it serves as a way of inoculating investors from liabilities arising in the ordinary course of business. It also affords owners, which are called members, flow-through tax treatment. And indeed, there is an operating agreement which not only prescribes the governance arrangement, but also specifies how cash flow is to be allocated, how tax benefits are to be allocated, and it can be done as imaginatively as the parties want it to be done. Form follows function. And here, flexibility is created through the way in which the deal gets designed, the way in which the entity is structured, and the way the operating agreement governs the respective rights and obligations of the parties. So that's what an LLC is. Many of you have seen limited liability companies before. It's a very popular form of doing business. But L3C is a special kind of limited liability company. Now, the first thing about it is it has one or more for-profit members, member again being an owner of a limited liability company, and one or more nonprofit members. So we have a mix of for-profit and nonprofit members. Instead of creating a conflict, however, you will see that their objectives are rendered complementary, and each benefits from the participation of the other. The LLC has a charitable or educational purpose. Why? Because the language of the statute is going to track the requirements of program-related investments under the Internal Revenue Code. And as they require purposes that are 501c3-like, so will the purpose clause of the limited liability company, supported by the statute of the state in which the limited liability company is organized. Today there are two such states that authorize L3Cs. One is Vermont, and the second is Michigan. And we're going to have an update a little later about Illinois, and there are other states as well that are quickly adopting the L3C form. Another requirement of the L3C that would not ordinarily occur in LLCs is the entity would not have been formed except to accomplish those purposes. There is a but-for condition here. Were it not for this fortuitous mix of for-profit and not-for-profit played out the way I'm going to describe to you, this business never would have happened. It would not have been economically viable, and the charitable purpose would not have been achieved. No significant purpose to produce income or property appreciation. Again, satisfying the statutory